Every champion in League is conceptualized with a designated role or roles in mind, both to give players a basic understanding of where they should take them and also for the design team to have a framework on how to craft their abilities. For example, you can easily tell if a champion is a support based on their weaker offensive faculty, high amount of crowd control, and/or ally targeting abilities, shields, buffs, what have you. Modern-day League of Legends has by far the highest champion role diversity we've ever seen, with dozens upon dozens of picks that can flex into more than one role. In spite of this, however, there's still a semblance of conformity among the 5 roles, and rarely will you find a champion not intended to be played in that role who is successful. Unfortunately, there are always exceptions to every rule. Cheese picks are a perennial sight in League, inevitable in every sense of the word. The thing is, usually, cheese picks are not very common sights, nor do they tend to be all that successful. The odds of you finding an Evelynn mid, Taric top, or Garen jungle are low for the simple fact that they're just not good there. And while once in a while you might see champions that have used an item, mechanic, or loophole to work in a role they're not intended for, such as Janna top a couple years back, a few off-kilter picks are cited quite often and are played to great effect, and they've been allowed to do so for a while, bringing us to our topic for today. I'll be going over a number of cheese picks, talking about how they work and why many players hate them. The term cheese pick is obviously subjective, moreover some might not care whatsoever about those picks while others hate them with a burning passion. For some of you, the champs you see on the thumbnail might leave you confused as to what makes those champs in particular cheesy compared to everyone else. Cheesing in a video game denotes achieving victory or completion of a task using tactics or methods technically inherent to the rules of the game but are unconventional and often considered cheap or unscrupulous. Again, what someone else thinks of cheese might not align with your definition. But as a rule of thumb, if the method grants the user an advantage that may not correspond to the effort and skill required to achieve a similar result, that's considered cheese. Top laners often consider ranged champions like Quinn, Kennen, and Twisted Fate to be cheesy on account of them being able to apply pressure on you while maintaining a safe distance away. And even if you try to engage on them, they each have self-peel of some kind. Over down in bot lane, people might consider Shaco's support to be cheesy on account of him being the literal embodiment of cheese. No offense to Shaco mates. I think at a certain point though, the champion just becomes ingrained into the minds of players as a legitimate viable pick for that role. Like nowadays, it's common knowledge that Talon can also be a jungler in addition to being a mid laner, especially when considering the expectations of that role. In the case of Talon, being able to parkour and wall hop is conducive towards the goals of a jungler, traversing the map, ganking lanes, all that stuff. In the case of Shaco's support, his boxes are outstanding for establishing control, which is the goal of a support. On the other hand, you have picks that appear to be suboptimal, and yet they still manage to work every once in a while or on occasion get so good at beating the competition that they inadvertently stop being cheese and start becoming mainstream. It's like the anti-meta destroys the meta so hard it becomes meta. I don't know. Anyway, I think the best way to tell if a champion is a cheese pick is if they have a skill set that's passable enough to survive in that lane while trading effectiveness in one area in exchange for another, notably something that allows them to better handle the usual competition you see in that role. Let's open up with top Warwick. Top lane is characterized by many things, first being its position on the map. It's fairly isolated relative to where you expect most of the early game action to take place. In light of this, many champions in top lane possess a modicum of sustain or a way to survive trades in battle. Vladimir, Fiora, Tryndamere, Darius, Renekton, Gragas, Aatrox, and so on having self-healing, or Camille, Cassandra, Malphite, Riven, Yone, and Rumble having shields, letting them stay in lane for long stretches of time without having to go back. Warwick has equal if not better sustain than just about every top laner in the game for 2 reasons. 1. His passive, which heals him on hit when he's below half HP, essentially granting him a no-cost way to sustain himself provided he can attack minions, aka neutral sustain. 2. His Q can also heal him in neutral, but more importantly it heals him off any trait. Top laners are some of the most resilient champions in the game, but Warwick is on a different level. So long as he doesn't get bursted below half HP, he can stay out for days. The second aspect is consistent DPS. Top laners either excel at trades or gradually harass you in lane through some kind of neutral poke. Warwick is once again good at both. Considering Primal Howl is universal damage reduction that also ends in a fear, he can use it to start a fight by activating it early, getting a few strikes in, then recasting it before walking away. Or if he gets engaged on, he can use it to mitigate damage and then fear enemies away to once again keep walking. Outside of poking him down, there's no easy way to fight a Warwick in a head-on confrontation without him coming off on top or coming out on top later when he heals off minions. He can also just occasionally Q you anytime you walk up to attack him, or through clever manipulation of Bloodhound's empowered movement speed if one of your teammates drops below half, he can run towards you really quickly and Q. All-inning can be tricky against him due to the fear on Primal Howl, and his all-in's also quite strong. Primal Howl's fear guarantees that he can land infinite duress, which also heals him a whole bunch, and if you drop below half HP, his attack speed increases against you, therefore making it risky to fight him when you yourself are injured. Then of course Barrier, anticipating that any sane individual will acquire grievous wounds to deal with you, most Warwick top players take Barrier, which they use at low HP to buy themselves just enough time to finish you off. The trade-off of taking 2 combat summoners is that you lose access to teleport, a vital resource in making it back to lane quickly. But since Bloodhunt gives Warwick increased tempo when moving in the general direction of an injured enemy champion, he can easily run back to lane faster than most champions by taking a specific route, giving him the luxury to run 2 combat sums. All of these advantages come at the cost of no wave clear and the aforementioned lack of neutral game, making him easy to shove against and bully from ranged. But he can always make up for this by building a Tiamat item, which he normally does, and most top laners are melee champions. You can essentially think of Warwick as a more aggressive Tahm Kench. He's designed to cheese lane by being much harder to fight than most top laners, since he has a perfect set of tools needed to 1v1 in melee. The caveat is that he does fall off relative to most top laners, so his only goal is to win lane and then snowball mid game. The second cheese pick is Tristana. Actually, over the past month or so, she's been the most picked mid laner, so I don't even know if she's a cheese pick, but the premise is still the same. Prevailing wisdom understands the most common sites in mid lane are mages and slayers, who capitalize on the position serving as the bedrock of the whole rift as well as being comparatively shorter in length. For mages, your close proximity to tower gives you a greater element of security, while you work towards a mid-game power spike and acquire your essential items. Being ranged and typically having good wave clear also makes controlling lane a lot easier. Meanwhile, slayers, your skirmishers and assassins, can either try and exploit the lack of mobility on most mages to rack up kills in lane, or roam elsewhere and get stuff done. The balancing dynamic between mages and slayers is that while in single combat the latter can effectively dismantle the former, again mages can usually position themselves close to their tower for better security, while also making use of their range advantage to stay safe during laning phase. In return, slayers can use whatever mobility they have to avoid the skill shots and whatnot of mages, while also abusing their lack of mobility by engaging on them if and when they miss position. How Tristana became notable was that she can handle both classes. In essence, she has the range and neutral game of a mage, but the mobility and DPS of a slayer, letting her take on either category of champions in lane relatively comfortably. For instance, if you're playing in a mobile mage like Victor and you get engaged on by Iona, Silas, Cassidon, Kiana, what have you, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose the exchange, as they can get a ball in your face and blow you to pieces, while potentially dodging your stuff. But if those same champs were to attempt that against a Tristana, she can jump away to reestablish a line of scrimmage, putting slayers in a position where they either full commit by chasing after her even more, likely exhausting any resource that could be used to disengage after a trade, or cut their losses and retreat, neither of which are favorable for them. When fighting a mage, for one, AD carries do more damage per auto attack, naturally. More importantly, they're cost free. Tristana can be out of mana and still apply pressure through autos. During the early game, however, when mages don't have mana, cooldown reduction, or ability power, their trades don't really do that much damage, while a few attacks from an ADC do deal a ton of damage. In the early game, a mage would need 2 or sometimes 3 rotations of their abilities to fully kill their lane opponent with no items, which is a long time waiting for cooldowns to come up. In other words, she has the same attack pressure that slayers do, enabling her to out all-in mages early on, while being difficult to engage on herself. Tristana can chunk you for half your HP or more with a few autos and explosive charge, at the same time having good cost wave clear and 2 ways to escape danger if she finds herself in it. The only reason she's kind of mid as an actual bot laner is because she has to worry about the very real possibility of dying, while in mid lane she's ironically a lot safer despite not having a support. In totality, Tristana gives up the usual priorities of a mage, area control and AoE damage, and the priorities of a slayer, high map tempo and pick potential, for lane dominance. Camille's support was more of a recent thing, but for the sake of brevity, using the previous 2 examples, we can easily infer why people would want to use her in this strange way. Ever since Bloodsong afforded a spellblade supports, Camille can do meaningful damage even with a low gold economy. She has a passive that can tank a fair bit of damage during trades, Hookshot, one of the best dashes in the game, and Hextech Ultimatum to lock down a target of choice. She's, for all intents and purposes, an engaged support like Leona, Alistar, and whatnot, only she has more kill power and roaming capability than your typical engaged support, but far less durability and no real way to protect her team. Very reminiscent of Pantheon and Set support back in their respective heydays. They support the ADC quote-unquote by helping them kill their lane opponent faster, and Camille has always been notorious for reaching full build status with only Spellblade, making you have to respect her kill power just as much, if not possibly more, than the actual ADC. Unlike Pantheon and Set though, Camille offers virtually nothing of value that can support a team outside of the bare minimum set of tools expected of engaged supports. Prior to getting reworked, Set had deceptively high damage even if you went full tank, thanks to his W damage scaling off his shield value, which is directly tied to his max health. Additionally, he can use enemy tanks and bruisers against their own team. Meanwhile, Pantheon had Aegis Assault, making tower dice free as fuck and allowing him to face tank enemy attacks for up to 2.5 seconds. Camille on the other hand has more damage and mobility than either of them, but that's really all she brings. As you can tell, cheese picks are all picked for the sole purpose of cheesing lane, to either have a strong laning phase or an easy one. While they're not unstoppable, the majority of players within the role the cheese pick is being used for are not used to those champs outside of their typical scenario. Typically, you only see Warwick when he's ganking you or outside of lane. You never expect him to weaponize his toolkit for a laning phase. Typically, you only see Camille after she farmed for 20 minutes and is two-shotting everyone. You don't see her playing in a 2v2 lane. In that regard, they're effectively matchup checks. If you don't know how to play against them, you're gonna get, well, cheesed. Okay, so if they supposedly make sense, why do people hate them? Not just opponents, but sometimes their own team. Cheese picks are disliked for the same reason as ranged top laners, for those who saw my video on that. While it's possible for them to continue impacting them into late game, the opportunity cost you pay to have such an advantage can run the risk of backfiring later on by disrupting the balance of your team. Remember, they forfeit a critical aspect or job conventionally expected of that role as a trade-off for increased lane dominance, meaning if they don't win lane, or worse yet lose lane, the consequences can be that much more damaging for your team than if they just win a normal pick. Since Trist has been popular in the past month or so, let's use her. If you have a Tristana mid, that means your team comp will have 280 carries. Not necessarily a bad thing, but unless the bot laner goes Karthus, Ziggs or Seraphine, it makes counterpicking or counter-building against that team a lot more effective. Frozen Heart, Ninja Tabby and Randuin's will get more mileage. Moreover, Tristana doesn't have the same massive AoE teamfight pressure as the Vladimir, Vex, and Anivia, nor can you skulk through the jungle picking off isolated targets like Kiana, Talon, and LeBlanc. I mean, you can, but it's much riskier. If Tristana falls behind in the early game, unlike a Sylas who can steal an enemy utility ultimate, or Twisted Fate who can be a stun bot, or Mages who can make up for their lower items through AoE damage, being primarily single target and mostly DPS, Tristana has no fallback. Warwick is similar. He's not a good split pusher due to his W being inconsistent and not working on towers. He's not much of a raid boss in the way Aatrox, Darius, Volibear, and Zed are, and while he does have two very effective crowd control abilities, depending on how far behind you are, he doesn't do enough damage to be public enemy number 1, nor does he have anywhere near the same durability as an actual tank. Finally, Camille, having zero supportive utility for her team, she will absolutely get outscaled by any enchanted support in terms of contribution, and she's incapable of face tanking for your team, so giving up a potential frontline pick for her is a titanic risk. Unless your top or jungle decides to go tank, your team is without anyone to stand between you and them. For Camille's support in particular, it's important to remember that while the enemy team may not know and therefore expect her capabilities, the same can also be said for her teammate. Not many ADCs can follow up on a 1400 range dash, or they may not realize that you do a ton of damage on your own and run away, thinking they lost the fight. Each of these picks is aimed specifically at cheesing lane and nothing more. They have just enough practical usability to where they're not a troll pick, so if they win lane, they can contribute a ton for their team as opposed to some dumb shit like AP Jarvan support. The trade-off is that winning lane goes from an option to an obligation. Going even is potentially a loss for most of these picks. You need at least some form of advantage, whether items or experience, to make up for the fact that if the match goes on too long, it comes at the expense of your team. Does this mean they shouldn't be allowed? Not necessarily. Like I said, they're just practical enough to have a commanding laning phase. That's the whole reason you're picking them to begin with, to win lane. But their inherently cheesy nature coupled with sacrificing stability for slightly more lane pressure makes them come off as selfish, usually in a more detrimental than beneficial way for your team. I suppose one thing they do offer is that cheese picks can all be flexed. It could be Warwick top or jungle, it could be Tristana mid or ADC, it can be Camille support or top. So it can give your team an easy counterpick if the enemy team guesses wrong, but that's about it. Anyway, what are your thoughts on cheese picks? Do you believe they should be allowed to stay in the game, or should they all get pushed back to their original role? Feel free to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you love to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @VarsFM, join my Discord server, and check out my discussion videos on other champion archetypes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.